Now that we've seen how to set up and configure our user profiles, it's time to turn our attention to our users' My Sites. What we want to do here is we want to talk a little bit about what My Sites are all about, and then go ahead and roll on into how we're going to configure and set all of this up. First up, what exactly is a My Site? Well, a My Site is a personalized user page. This is basically the user's little corner of the SharePoint world. And from there, they're going to be able to display and edit their own user profile information, as well as share whatever other information it is that they might want. And that's going to include documents, maybe blog postings, and any other SharePoint item that they want to share out with the team. Now, in order to set up a My Site, there's a handful of steps that need to be walked through. Fortunately, most of this is stuff that we've already done. One of the items that we're going to need is a site collection that's been created inside of our web application based on the My Sites host template. And this is really straightforward. Just simply go in, create the site collection, just like we've learned previously, make sure that your type is the My Site host, and away you go. Now, the web application that's going to be hosting all of our My Sites is also going to need a wildcard managed path. And that wildcard managed path is where all of the user profile pages, all the My Sites, are going to wind up. Now, you can call this kind of whatever it is that you want. The two most common by far are going to be personal and people. Now, the nice part about giving it a name of personal or people is it's a great way to kind of indicate, hey, look, this is user-generated content. And that's going to be one of the most important things that you're going to be dealing with, one of the most important things that you're going to be managing. The reason for that is because, like we mentioned before when we were talking about our user profiles, when we were talking about security, I want to make sure that everybody's fully aware of the fact that this is user-generated content, that there is no level of workflow or approval or anything like that that's going in with the information that's being displayed out. And so a very nice way to ensure that is by using personal or people as the wildcard managed path. We also need a search center. And that search center, of course, is where all of our searches are going to be forwarded onto. And that doesn't have to be inside the web application that's going to be hosting our My Sites. That could actually just be the normal search center that you've already created. Now, I mentioned a couple of times our web application. Every user's My Site is a site collection. And site collections, of course, need to reside inside of a web application. Now, you don't actually have to create a web application specifically for My Sites. That being said, I strongly recommend it for a lot of different reasons. Part of it is because of the fact that a web application winds up being a context for databases. Every user's My Site is a site collection. And so whatever information it is they're going to be sharing, their documents, their blogs, etc., all that's going to need to go inside of a content database. And if you have an organization that's numbering into the thousands, you're going to start to bump up on the limit of site collections that are allowed inside of a content database. So one very simple thing that I can do is I can create multiple content databases, and then what's going to wind up happening behind the scenes is that SharePoint will basically round robin the creation of each site collection, of each My Site, inside of each one of those content databases. So that way it's very easy for me to spread the data out across multiple content databases. In addition, at the web application level, there's an awful lot of defaults that I have the ability to configure. That I have the ability to go in through the user permissions and remove branding options. Whenever a user sets up their My Site, they automatically become an SCA of their My Site, meaning that they could do whatever it is they wanted to that and wind up going in and changing the color scheme. And that's absolutely not something that I want. That I want all of my sites to look the same. Basically, failure to do that is going to wind up making this go from the Facebook of SharePoint to the MySpace of SharePoint, where everybody goes in and does their own thing. I want consistency here. I also want to make sure that I set up a default quota. The reason is let's say that we have a company party, and somebody brings their little point-and-shoot camera that, of course, is 10 megapixels, and, each image is 3-4 megs in size, and they take 100 pictures. And they want to go ahead and upload those into their My Site. Now, do I want pictures of the company party inside of a My Site? Absolutely. Do I want 300 to 400 megs worth of that? Absolutely not. And unfortunately, because of the fact that spaces become so widely available, users don't always think about the size of the data that they're dealing with. So they get back to their desk on Monday morning, they just simply upload all the images, and away they go. Not something that I want. So I want to make sure that all the My Sites have a quota, and at the web application level, you have the ability to configure a default quota. Now, the last big thing that needs to be done on the web application is we do need to enable self-service site creation. Now, all of this we've seen before, so I don't have to worry about going back and doing all this all over again. So I've already created this inside of my environment. So when we get into the demo, I'm not going to demo stuff that we've already worked on. Let's instead focus our attention on the new stuff. Let's get in and configure our My Sites. Now, a couple little options that we're going to have inside of our My Sites. It's going to ask us for the Search Center. It's going to ask us for the My Site host, and this is going to be the location of the web application. And then it's also going to ask us for the managed path that's going to contain all of our My Sites. Now, everybody's My Site is going to have some form of a name, so one of the other very big questions that this is going to ask me is for the naming format. And my naming format can have one of three values. It could be simply the username, in which case if I go in and I created my site, assuming that my username is C. Harrison, then it's going to be mysites.geektrainer.com/people/C. Harrison. Now, the nice part about this is the fact that it's going to be relatively easy for users to figure out what somebody else's My Site happens to be. The catch, however, is that it's not going to resolve conflicts. So where should we use this? Well, we should use this in a single domain environment or any other situation where the policy is that everybody's username must be unique. The next option that we have is to resolve conflicts by using a naming scheme of the domain name underscore and then the username. So what's going to wind up happening is that the first person is going to get their username for their My Site URL, and then the second and thereon forward is going to get domain underscore username. Now, the big challenge that we're going to have with that is really, well, whining. The number one reason for IT decisions is by far politics. If you choose that second option, what's going to happen is the first person is going to get C. Harrison, let's say. The second person is going to get domain underscore C. Harrison. And you know exactly what's going to wind up happening. Is they're going to come up to you and they're going to whine. Well, why didn't I get my username? I don't have time for that. So if I'm in an environment where we do have duplicated usernames across different domains, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the third option, which is everybody gets domain underscore username. Now, again, as much as possible, I love that first option, but that first option is only going to work in environments where everybody's username is unique. In addition, we're going to get asked about a couple of different security options that will be able to determine the read permission level, or basically who's going to have read access to your My Sites by default. We'll also be able to set up our security trimming, whether or not we want to security trim all links, whether or not we want to security trim specific links, or if we just want to show everything, and then if a user hits a link they don't have permissions to, then they're going to wind up simply getting an error message at that point. Generally speaking, you want to enable security trimming on all links. We're also going to get asked about My Site Cleanup. If a user gets deleted from Active Directory, what's going to wind up happening on the next sync is SharePoint's going to see that, and it's going to want to delete that user's profile. Now, there might be a problem where maybe the account was deleted by accident. But the bigger issue is that if we delete an account, chances are we need to do something for regulatory compliance to make sure that we're storing that user's information. So what we want is we want somebody else to be the second owner of the My Site site collections. And so that's what we can configure in that option there for the My Site Cleanup. And then last but not least is the privacy settings. By default, your My Sites are private, and they're only shared out with people who a user's decided to show their My Sites to. Now, the nice part about that, of course, is that it gives you a bit more privacy, it gives you a bit more security. The downside, however, is that this can really hamper those free-form styles of connections that you're going to be looking for with My Sites. So what you can do is you can go in and make your My Sites public by default. Now, keep in mind that public is just going to be inside your organization, but you can make that public if you so desire. Now, the last little thing is to configure our news feed. Now, the news feed is going to use a timer job behind the scenes, and it has to be enabled, and by default it will be. You're also going to notice that we can determine whether or not, if we were doing an upgrade, that we want to migrate over our SharePoint 2010 activity. And then last but not least is we can also email users notifications if somebody comments on a newsfeed item. Basically, think Facebook. That if I go into somebody's newsfeed in Facebook and I comment and then somebody else comments, I'm going to get an email about that. The exact same thing happens in SharePoint. Let's take a look at how to set up our My Site configuration. Now, like I mentioned before, I've already set up the web application. I've already set up the My Site site collection. I've already set up the managed path. That's all stuff that we've done in prior lessons, so I'm not worried at all about that. But what we haven't done is set up our My Site. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Central Administration, Service Applications, and User Profiles. And then you're going to notice that I've got a link right here for Set Up My Sites, and I'm going to hit that. And now it's going to ask me where my search center is, and this is going to be in https://intranet.geektrainer.com/search. Then it's going to ask me for my site location, and that's going to be http://mysites.geektrainer.com. And then if I scroll on down, it will ask me for the personal site location. I set mine up as personal. It's going to ask me about the naming format, and I'm going to go with my username. It'll ask me about my language options. I can choose, if I so desire, to allow the user to choose their language. The read level, and I want you to notice that by default, everyone and authenticated users has read permissions by default. If you decide that you want to dial that back or change that to something else, you can do that right there. On my security trimming, you'll notice that we can check all links. We can check specific links and just go in and specify the links that you want to check, or show all links and not security trim any of them. Generally speaking, that default is the one that I want, so I'm going to leave that way. I'm going to enable my activities inside the newsfeed. I'm not going to worry too much about our email notifications. Let's just go ahead and say SharePoint@geektrainer.com. And then you're going to notice my site cleanup, so I can specify a secondary owner here. And then this way, in this case me, I will always be listed as a secondary owner of everybody's My Site. So I can always go in, navigate directly to a My Site, and make changes that way. We can choose whether or not We want our My Sites to be public by default, and then hit OK. And just like that, we've configured our My Sites. Let's go in and test our My Sites, make sure that it actually works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate on over to https intranet.geektrainer.com, and then I'm going to click Sites. And this will automatically take me over to my site. And now what you're going to notice is that I get my very basic little page here. I get a couple little links where I can go in and start changing things. So for example, you're going to notice it gives me the ability to change my photo, adjust my personal settings, and then any other information it is that I might want. So if I want to change my photo, then I just simply hit change. And then I could go ahead and browse to a picture here, hit upload, and voila, there is my little picture. And then I can also go in and start adding in whatever additional information it is that I might want to fill in about me. Pretty slick. Now, one of the very nice things about having a My Site is that this can be a very nice way to do user training. That it's a great way for them to get connected and a great way for my users to have a very nice first experience inside of SharePoint. There's how we can configure My Sites inside of SharePoint. Thank you for watching.